I am a 70-year-old widower, a man everyone in this town thinks has already lived his story. A man they think is waiting quietly for the end of his days. They see my trembling hands, my cane, my slow steps across the porch, and they assume I am weak, harmless, fading. But tonight, as I stared at the dark red stain blooming in the sink, I knew weakness had nothing to do with what was happening to me. I spat blood. My throat burned as if fire had traveled down with the tea I had just drunk. The cup still sat on the table, steam curling lazily into the midnight air. And yet, I felt it in every nerve of my body. Someone had tried to poison me. And not just someone, it was her, my daughter-in-law, the woman who smiled politely at me every morning, who placed that very cup in front of me as if serving me out of duty, had slipped something into my tea. The taste had been wrong, metallic, almost bittersweet, but I forced it down, hiding the flicker of suspicion that had already been living in my chest for weeks. My tongue was heavy, my stomach clenched, and when I leaned over the sink and saw the streak of blood, it was no longer doubt. It was certainty. She was trying to kill me. In that silent kitchen, lit only by the faint glow of a single bulb, I clutched the edge of the counter and forced my breath to steady. Rage surged through me, but I didn't shout. I didn't call my son. I didn't confront her. Instead, I wiped my mouth, rinsed the sink clean, and straightened my back. Because she thought I wouldn't know. She thought I was too old, too broken, too simple to notice. What she didn't know was that once, long ago, I was a military doctor. I had patched up men torn open by bullets. I had smelled poison before. I had fought battles where one drop of the wrong liquid meant death. She thought she was playing with a fragile old man, but she had chosen the wrong opponent. It started weeks before. Every evening after dinner, she insisted on making me tea. At first I thought it was kindness, maybe even an attempt at respect, because after my wife passed away the house became colder, emptier. My son buried himself in work, or maybe in excuses, and she became the one who managed the household. But her kindness tasted bitter. I noticed small things, the way she avoided my eyes when she placed the cup, the way my son suddenly spoke about inheritance, about how the house and the land could be better used. And then there was my body, the dizziness, the subtle nausea, a strange heaviness in my chest at night. I have treated soldiers, prisoners, even enemy spies. I know when the body is being tampered with. She thought age had dulled my senses, but each sip told me more than she imagined. Tonight, the evidence was undeniable. Blood. No one spits blood from a harmless cup of tea. I walked back to the table and sat down, the cane resting against my leg. The cup still steamed. I stared at it for a long moment, studying it like a piece of evidence. Outside, the wind rattled against the windows. The house was quiet. My son and his wife were asleep upstairs, safe in their ignorance, believing the poison was already working its way through my veins. But I was not asleep. I was wide awake, my mind sharper than it had been in years. They thought I was too weak to fight back, too old to matter. They forgot that war teaches you patience, and betrayal teaches you silence until the right moment arrives. I would not storm into their bedroom and shout accusations. I would not cry. I would not beg. No, I would plan. I would watch. And when the time came, I would strike back in a way they could never anticipate. I poured the rest of the tea into a glass jar I had hidden in the cupboard, sealed it, and wrote the date on a slip of paper. Evidence. My hands shook slightly, but not from weakness. From fury. Because betrayal, when it comes from strangers, is pain. But when it comes from family, it is fire that eats at your bones. This house, this land, everything I had worked for my entire life was supposed to be passed down with honor, with dignity. My wife and I built it with sweat and sacrifice. And now, in my twilight years, the woman who married my son thought she could speed up my death to take it all. No, that was not going to happen. I remember sitting there in the dim light, staring at the medals in the cabinet across the room. Bronze stars, certificates, photographs of younger men standing beside me with mud on their faces and gratitude in their eyes. They were proof that once upon a time, I saved lives while others tried to take them. I had buried comrades, I had seen treachery, I had looked death in the eye and spit in its face. And now, my own daughter-in-law wanted to hand me over to death quietly, with poison in a cup of tea. If she thought that was how my story ended, she was wrong. When the clock struck 1, I heard footsteps upstairs, soft creaks on the wooden floor. Maybe she was checking if I was still breathing. Maybe she wanted to see me writhing in pain. Too weak to call for help, I sat still, back straight, the cane in my hand, the jar of poisoned tea hidden behind me. My heart was pounding, but not with fear, with purpose. She would regret underestimating me. She would regret believing that age had erased everything I once was. The truth was, the years had only made me more dangerous, because old men don't fight with muscles. We fight with memory, with patience, with everything we have endured. She had declared war, and I was ready to answer. I whispered into the silence, to the photograph of my late wife on the mantel. They want me gone, Maria, but I'm not leaving this house as a victim. I will fight, not just for myself, but for the dignity of what we built. Her eyes, frozen in that picture, seemed to agree, and for the first time in years, I felt alive again. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew this was about justice, about showing them and the world that an old man still carries fire in his bones. The morning after I found blood in the sink, I sat at the breakfast table pretending nothing had happened. My son read the newspaper with one hand and scrolled his phone with the other, barely acknowledging me. My daughter-in-law, Isabel, moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone who believed she ruled the house. She set a cup in front of me, steaming again, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Here, Father, your morning tea." I looked at the cup. My lips almost curled into a smile, but I kept my expression flat. She thought I would drink it as always, that I would continue to play the role of the frail, oblivious old man. I lifted the cup slowly, inhaled the aroma, and set it down without drinking. "Later," I said. Isabel's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, a hint of irritation flashing across her mask of politeness. She quickly recovered, forcing a smile as she turned back to the stove. My son didn't notice a thing. Or maybe he didn't care. I watched him carefully. Once he used to sit across from me with eagerness, asking about the war, about his mother's recipes, about how to fix a fence or negotiate with neighbors. Now he seemed like a stranger living under my roof, waiting for me to vanish so he could claim what was left. Isabel had a hand on his shoulder, whispering something in his ear, and I saw how he leaned into her, how her words carried more weight than mine ever could. I was no longer the father, the elder, the anchor of this family. I was the burden, and burdens, in their minds, are meant to be removed. I began to watch more closely. Small details, small betrayals that built into something greater. My cane moved from the corner of the room to behind a door. My shoes were placed where I would trip over them. Medications that I had kept in a drawer disappeared, only to reappear a week later. I would hear whispers when they thought I slept, conversations about what happens when he passes and the land is too valuable to waste. My wife and I had worked that land with blistered hands, had built this house with sweat dripping into the soil. And now, in hushed voices, they divided it like vultures, picking at a corpse not yet cold. I clenched my fists beneath the table, but I said nothing. Silence was my weapon. I had learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one who does not speak. That evening, Isabel prepared dinner as usual. My son, Daniel, laughed at some joke she whispered to him. The laughter echoed against the walls like a mockery. When Isabel placed the tea beside my plate again, I noticed the faintest tremor in her hand. She was nervous. She wanted me gone quickly. I lifted the cup, held it to my lips, and let the steam rise against my face. Then, without warning, I set it back down untouched and stared directly into her eyes. For a second, her smile faltered. I didn't need words. The silence between us was enough to tell her I knew. She quickly turned away, clattering dishes louder than necessary, pretending to be busy. Daniel didn't notice, but I saw her back stiffen, her shoulders tense. She was afraid. That night, when they went upstairs, I opened the old chest in my room. Inside were relics of a life they had forgotten I once lived, my military uniform folded neatly, yellowed letters from men whose lives I had saved, a stethoscope wrapped in cloth, and a leather-bound notebook filled with medical notes from the field. I took out the notebook, flipped through the pages, and found the section on poisons. Notes scribbled hastily during missions, antidotes tested in desperate circumstances, handwriting smudged by rain and dirt. I traced the lines with my finger and felt the weight of years press against me. Isabel thought poison was simple, but poison is a conversation between the body and the betrayer, and I could read that language fluently. I began collecting samples. Every time Isabel brought me tea, I poured a portion into a hidden jar. I labeled each one with the date and time. The cabinet beneath my bed became an evidence locker, just like the field hospitals I once ran. I noticed patterns. Some days the tea left me dizzy. Other days it made my stomach twist. She was experimenting, adjusting dosages, testing the limits of what my body could endure. That terrified me, but it also gave me power, because experimentation leaves traces, and traces can become proof. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere in the house thickened. Isabel grew bolder. She began speaking more openly about inheritance in front of me, as if testing my reactions. "This house is too big for him," she told Daniel one night as I sat silently in the living room, pretending to read. "When he's gone, we could remodel, sell the land, move to the city. Imagine what we could do." Daniel nodded slowly, not meeting my eyes. My heart cracked, but I kept my face unreadable. My son, the boy I raised, was willing to trade my life for convenience. That betrayal cut deeper than Isabel's poison ever could. The neighbors began noticing too. One afternoon, Mrs. Hernandez from across the street stopped me on the porch. "You look pale, senor. Are you well?" she asked, concern in her eyes. I forced a smile, gripping my cane tighter. "Just old age, nothing more." But she frowned, shaking her head. No, I've seen old age. This looks different." Her words lingered in my mind. Even outsiders could see what my own son pretended not to notice. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered to the photo of my wife again. "Maria, they are killing me slowly, but I will not let them succeed. I will not leave this world like this." I started to test myself. After each sip, I examined my pulse, my pupils, the color of my nails. Old habits returned, instincts I thought I had buried with the war. I scribbled notes in my medical journal, cross-referenced symptoms, and marked possible substances. It became clear. Isabel was using something accessible, something she could slip into the tea without arousing suspicion. Rat poison. A crude, cowardly choice, but effective if unchecked. My fury burned hotter with every confirmation. She wanted me to die quietly, slipping away in my sleep, leaving behind everything my wife and I had built. But I would not give her that satisfaction. One evening, I pretended to stumble in the hallway, collapsing against the wall. Isabel rushed forward, her face twisted with a smile she tried to hide. "Father, are you all right?" she asked, her voice dripping with false concern. I let my head loll, breathing shallowly, and whispered, "Just tired." She helped me to my room, tucking the blanket around me like a child. But I saw the glimmer in her eyes. She thought her plan was working. That night I heard her whispering to Daniel, their voices hushed but urgent. "It won't be long now," she said. "Be patient." My son sighed, not with grief, but with relief. "Good," he muttered. "We need that land. We can't keep waiting." The words struck me like bullets. He was in on it, my own flesh and blood. I closed my eyes, forcing back the sting of tears, and swore that if they wanted war, I would give them war. The escalation was not only inside the house. Subtle pressure mounted outside too. Letters from banks arrived, inquiries about ownership, suggestions to update property records. Isabel must have been preparing paperwork, moving pieces like a chess player, setting up checkmate. She underestimated me. In my youth, I had played more dangerous games than hers, with lives and nations at stake. This was just another battlefield, and I knew how to survive. But survival was not enough. I wanted justice. I wanted her mask ripped away, her poison exposed, and my son forced to face the truth of what he had become. So I waited. Each day I collected evidence, endured the poison, and acted weaker than I was. I coughed deliberately, let my hands tremble, let my footsteps falter. Isabel and Daniel began to relax, confident in their illusion of power. They laughed louder, whispered less carefully. They thought the end was near, and I, in silence, sharpened my blade of truth. The night I decided to act, the air was heavy with silence. Isabel had brought me my tea as always, her smile tight, her voice syrupy sweet. Daniel barely glanced at me from across the table, his mind already elsewhere, maybe already spending what he thought would soon be his. I cradled the cup in my hands, let the steam curl beneath my nose, and drank every last drop. For the first time in weeks, I swallowed it all. Isabel's eyes glimmered. I saw the faintest curl of triumph on her lips. "Sleep well, Father," she said softly as she cleared the plates. I nodded, hiding my own smile. Tonight would be the last night they believed their plan was working. I returned to my room, placed the empty cup in my evidence box, and lay on the bed. The poison churned inside me, but I had already prepared the antidote, something I had mixed in secret with herbs and a compound I still remembered from field medicine. The bitterness burned my throat, but the knowledge that I was still in control steadied me. As I listened to the house grow quiet, footsteps above me settling into bed, I rehearsed the next steps in my mind. The war had taught me that victory belonged not to the strongest, but to the one who chose the battlefield. And tonight, the battlefield would be my own body. At dawn, I staggered out of my room and collapsed dramatically against the living room floor. My breath came ragged, my limbs limp. Isabel rushed down the stairs, her hand clutching the rail, her eyes wide. Daniel followed, his face pale but his lips tight, almost expectant. "Father!" Isabel cried, kneeling beside me, her voice breaking with false alarm. I felt her fingers press against my neck, checking for a pulse. I let it flutter faintly beneath her touch, enough to make her believe the poison was taking me. She gasped, feigning horror, but in her eyes I saw the spark of victory. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering, "Call the doctor." She shook her head, glancing at him. "No need, it's almost over." She thought she had won, but when the ambulance arrived, summoned not by them, but by me the night before, the real trap began. My friend, Dr. Morales, a man I had once patched up in the battlefield, stepped through the door. His hair was grayer now, but his eyes still burned with the same fire of loyalty. He knelt beside me, examined my pupils, my pulse, and whispered so only I could hear, "You're ready?" I gave the faintest nod. He turned sharply toward Isabel and Daniel. "This man has been poisoned," he declared, his voice loud enough to fill the room. Their faces drained of color. Isabel stammered, What are you saying?" Morales held up the cup I had placed carefully on the nightstand. "This is evidence, traces of toxic compounds. He's been targeted deliberately." Daniel shook his head violently. No, that's impossible. He's old, he's sick, that's all." But I forced myself upright, my body trembling with a performance I had perfected. I pointed a shaking finger at them both. My voice, weak but deliberate, cut through the room. "You think I didn't know? You think I couldn't tell what you slipped into my tea? I was saving lives before you were even born. I know the taste of poison, and I know betrayal when it's sitting at my own table." Isabel's mouth opened, then closed. For once she had no words. Her hands trembled against her apron. I let silence hang for a long moment before continuing. "For weeks, I collected every cup, every trace, every dose you thought I didn't notice. It's all here." I reached under the blanket and pulled out the small box of jars, neatly labeled with dates. Morales took them, examined them, and nodded grimly. "This is more than enough proof." The weight of the evidence settled into the room like a storm cloud. Daniel lunged forward, his voice shaking with desperation. "Father, you're mistaken. She would never. She loves you." But I cut him off with a cold laugh, one that startled even me. "Love? Is that what you call slipping poison into a man's drink? Is that what you call whispering in the dark about selling the land your mother and I built with our bare hands?" My words struck him like blows. His face twisted, guilt flashing across his features before he dropped his gaze. Isabel finally found her voice, sharp and brittle. "You have no proof it was me. Maybe someone else. Maybe—" She stopped when Morales pulled a small recorder from his pocket and pressed play. Her own voice filled the room, captured from a phone call I had secretly recorded through a device hidden under the dining table. "It won't be long now," her voice echoed. "A few more doses and the old man will be gone. Then the land is ours." Her knees buckled. She sank into the chair, her face white as chalk. Daniel stared at her as though seeing her for the first time, but I saw the truth in his eyes. He already knew. He had been complicit. I rose slowly, my cane steadying me, my back straight as if the years had melted away. For the first time in a long while, I felt the authority of the man I once was, the man who had led soldiers, who had stitched flesh with steady hands under gunfire. I turned to them both. My voice, no longer frail, thundered through the room. You tried to bury me with poison. But the grave you dug is your own. I am not dead, I am not finished. And you will face what you have done. The silence that followed was broken only by Isabel's sobbing. Daniel's fists clenched, his face red with shame, but he couldn't look at me. Morales stood tall, holding the jars and the recorder. This evidence, he said firmly, will speak louder than any words. The authorities will know exactly what you tried to do. I looked at my son one last time, my heart heavy with both love and fury. You were my blood, I whispered, but you chose greed over family, you chose betrayal over dignity. And now, you will learn that an old man's silence does not mean ignorance, it means patience. That morning, the police walked them out of my house in handcuffs. Neighbors gathered, their whispers filling the street. Some gasped, some shook their heads in disbelief. They had seen Isabel as the perfect wife, Daniel as the devoted son. Now they saw the truth, and as I watched from the porch, leaning on my cane, the sun rose behind me, casting my shadow long and steady across the ground. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. The day of the hearing arrived cloaked in a tension I had not felt since the battlefield. It was early morning when I buttoned my only suit, a navy jacket that smelled faintly of cedar from years in the closet. I stood before the mirror, tracing the lines of my face, the scars of time, the creases of grief and endurance. For 70 years I had lived, fought, buried, and loved. But this day I would stand not as a relic of the past, not as a weak old man, but as a father who had been betrayed and who demanded the truth be spoken aloud. The courthouse loomed tall against the pale sky. Its stone walls seemed heavier that morning, as though they too carried the burden of what was about to unfold. People gathered at the entrance, their murmurs rising like smoke. Neighbors who once smiled politely when they saw me now avoided my eyes. Some had already chosen sides and whispered conversations at markets and church pews. Some said I was bitter, inventing lies to punish my son. Others whispered that I was weak, too old to resist the inevitable, but the truth was about to cut through every rumor like a blade. I stepped inside, leaning on my cane, the echo of its tap, tap, tap bouncing against the marble floor. The hall smelled of paper, sweat, and old wood. Isabel and Daniel were already seated with their lawyer, a man with slick hair and a suit too expensive for his soul. Isabel avoided my eyes, her hands trembling in her lap. Daniel sat stiff, his jaw clenched, trying to look composed, but the sweat glistening on his brow betrayed him. He would not meet my gaze either. When the judge entered, the room rose. His voice was calm, almost bored, but his presence commanded respect. He called the case: attempted poisoning, fraud, conspiracy, words that once belonged to distant stories, now bound to my own family. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to be laid bare. The prosecutor began, presenting the evidence I had so carefully collected: the jars of tea remnants, each labeled with dates, the toxicology reports Morales had conducted, the photographs of my hands holding the cups, the labels showing each day they tried to weaken me. The recorder played Isabel's voice, her whisper sharp as a dagger. A few more doses and the old man will be gone. The room fell silent. A gasp rippled through the crowd. People shifted on the benches, their faces pale with shock. Isabel's face crumbled. She buried her face in her hands, tears slipping between her fingers. Daniel's lawyer stood, his voice slick and confident, claiming it was a misunderstanding, that the tape was fabricated, that I, in my old age, had confused bitterness for poison. He gestured toward me as though I were a senile relic clinging to power I no longer possessed. "The old man is ill," he sneered. "He is imagining enemies in his own family." My blood boiled, but I remained seated, my gaze locked on him, silent but unyielding. Then the judge turned to me. "You may speak." I rose slowly, each step deliberate. My cane tapped against the floor, echoing like a drumbeat of war. When I stood at the center of the courtroom, I looked at the people, at the faces I had known for decades, at the children who once waved at me in the street, at the neighbors who once shared bread and coffee with my wife. I drew in a deep breath and began. I am not a man of imagination. I am a man of memory. I remember the war, when bullets tore the air and men bled out in the dirt. I remember stitching wounds under fire, saving lives with nothing but my hands and faith. I remember building my house with my wife, laying each brick, each beam, dreaming of the family that would fill it. I remember my son's first steps, his first words, the way he clung to my hand. These are not fantasies. These are truths. And it is truth that I bring here today. I turned toward Isabel. She shrank in her chair, her face streaked with tears. You sat at my table. You called me father. You poured poison into my tea with the same hands that should have served food, that should have cared for a family. You betrayed not just me, but the vows you made when you married my son. Then I turned toward Daniel, my own son. My voice cracked, but I did not falter. And you, my blood, my legacy. You stood beside her. You knew. You chose silence. You chose greed. You chose betrayal over dignity. Do you know what it means to watch your own child wait for your death? Do you know what it feels like to see the house your mother loved reduced to nothing more than a prize for vultures? The courtroom was silent, the only sound my voice filling the air. I raised my hand and pointed at the evidence. They thought I was too old, too weak, too blind to see what was being done to me. But I am not weak. I am not blind. I saw everything. I endured it all, waiting, gathering proof, biding my time. Because patience, my friends, is not weakness. It is strength. It is the strength of an old tree that has withstood storms, of a soldier who knows the right moment to strike, of a father who refuses to let betrayal be the last chapter of his life. I let the silence stretch, then lowered my voice, almost a whisper. They wanted my house. They wanted my land. But what they tried to take was not just wood and soil. It was my dignity, and that I will never surrender. The judge's eyes were fixed on me, his expression unreadable. But I saw the way the crowd shifted, the way neighbors who once doubted now looked at Isabel and Daniel with disgust, their whispers turning into sharp condemnations. The lawyer stammered, trying to object, but the weight of the evidence, the recording, the jars, the toxicology reports crushed his words. Finally, the judge leaned forward. His gavel struck the desk once, the crack like thunder. This court finds the defendants guilty of conspiracy and attempted poisoning. Assets belonging to the estate will remain under the protection of the law. Sentencing will follow. The room erupted with murmurs. Some gasped, some nodded, some shook their heads in disbelief. But I stood still, my cane firm against the ground, my back straight. Isabel wept uncontrollably. Daniel stared at me, his eyes hollow, his face ashen, as if his entire world had collapsed. Perhaps it had. As the guards moved to take them away, Daniel's voice broke through the noise. "Father, please." Just one word, but it carried the weight of years, of blood ties twisted by greed. I met his eyes for the last time. "You chose this path," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart ached. "And now, you will walk it." The doors closed behind them, the clang of metal echoing like a final judgment. I stood alone in the courtroom, surrounded by whispers, but for the first time, I felt no shame, no fear, only a calm that spread through me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Dignity had been restored, not by anger or violence, but by truth, patience, and the refusal to bow to betrayal. And as I stepped out into the daylight, the sun warm on my face, I thought of my wife. I imagined her smiling, her voice in the wind saying, "You did not let them win." I lifted my chin, inhaled the morning air, and whispered to myself, "No, I never will." The day they were sentenced, the town felt different. The sky was brighter, the streets calmer, but beneath it all lingered a quiet hum of gossip. People who once crossed the street to avoid me now stopped me in the plaza, their voices low and ashamed. "We didn't know, Don Ernesto. We thought—" I would simply nod, because what could words do? They had believed the lies, and perhaps I had expected too much of them. Trust, once broken, was not easily mended. But I no longer sought their approval. I had faced the storm, and I had stood tall. That was enough. At night, my house felt too quiet. The echoes of laughter, the footsteps of my son as a boy, the hum of my wife's songs in the kitchen, all of it lived only in memory now. I would sit by the fireplace, cane resting against the chair, and let the flames dance while I thought of the price of dignity. Justice had been served, yes, but it did not erase the hollow ache in my chest. Betrayal had carved scars deeper than any wound I had seen in war. Yet, even in that pain, there was peace. Because I had chosen to fight, not with fists or rage, but with patience, truth, and the wisdom of years. Neighbors began visiting again. Some brought bread, others just silence and a handshake. Miss Alvarez, who had once whispered that I was senile, came to my door with tears in her eyes. "Forgive us, Don Ernesto. We doubted you." I looked into her trembling face and saw not malice, only weakness. "The important thing," I told her, "is that the truth was stronger than the lie." She nodded, and for the first time in months, I saw respect in her eyes. The land they had tried to steal with forged signatures, remained mine. I walked its edges at sunrise, the soil damp beneath my shoes, the scent of earth rising like memory itself. This land had carried me through life. It had carried my wife, my family, my bloodline. And though Daniel had tried to turn it into currency, into a bargaining chip for ambition, it had outlasted him. Standing in the fields, the morning sun warming my back, I whispered to the earth, "They will not take you, not while I breathe." In the weeks that followed, I noticed a change within myself. My cane felt lighter, my steps firmer. Age had not disappeared, no. My body still ached, my hands still trembled on cold mornings. But inside, I no longer felt like a man waiting for the end. I was a man who had endured, who had stared betrayal in the face and reclaimed his dignity. And dignity, I realized, is not something others can grant you. It is something you seize, even when the world conspires to strip it away. One evening, Morales visited me. He brought wine, the cheap kind we used to share in the younger days, and we sat on the porch watching the sun sink into the horizon. He raised his glass. "To patience," he said. I raised mine. "To dignity." We drank in silence. The years heavy between us, but also a quiet pride. He leaned back, his face lit by the last golden rays. "You know," he said, "many men would have died quietly. Most would have surrendered." I looked at him, my voice steady. "That's the difference. A man dies only once, but he can surrender 1,000 times if he lets betrayal define him. I chose not to. The trial had shaken the community. For months, whispers spread about Isabel, about Daniel, about how greed corrodes even the blood of family. Some pitied them, some hated them. For me, they were no longer my concern. My heart had closed that chapter. They were my blood, yes. But they had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. The memory of my son as a child still lived in me, but the man he became was a stranger. I buried that stranger in my heart, and in doing so, freed myself. Slowly, my home began to feel alive again. Not with family, not with the echoes of laughter past, but with resilience. I repaired the roof with my own hands, even if my back screamed with pain. I polished my wife's old rocking chair and placed it on the porch where she used to sit. I let the wind carry her memory through the rooms, and in the silence, I felt her strength beside me. One afternoon, as the sun poured through the windows, I whispered, "We protected it, mi amor. They could not destroy what we built." And in that moment, I felt her smile, as if the walls themselves breathed relief. The townspeople began to see me differently, no longer as the frail old man they thought easy to exploit, but as a survivor, a man who still had fire in his soul. Young men came to me, seeking advice on work, on family, on honor. Young women came, asking how to protect what was theirs. And when I looked into their eyes, I told them what I had learned through blood and betrayal. Never confuse silence with weakness. Sometimes silence is only patience, waiting for the right moment to speak. But when that moment comes, do not whisper. Speak so the world can hear you. The story of my betrayal and survival spread farther than I imagined. A journalist came one day, notebook in hand, asking to hear it in my own words. He wanted to know how a 70-year-old man had turned the tables on his own family, how he had caught them in their lie. I told him the truth, the whole truth, because I knew that somewhere, another man or woman was sitting in silence, doubting their own strength. If my story lit a candle in their darkness, then it was worth telling. And so, I sit here now, on my porch, the night air cool, the stars above sharp as diamonds. I tell this story not to boast, not to relish in revenge, but to remind you, whoever listens, that betrayal may cut deep, but it does not define you. Dignity is not something age can erase. Strength is not measured by youth or muscle, but by the courage to face those who would strip you of everything and still say, "No, you will not win." I am Ernesto. I am 70 years old. My son betrayed me. My daughter-in-law tried to poison me. The world thought I was finished, but I am still here. My dignity is intact, my land is mine, my name unbroken. And I ask you, if it were you in my place, if those closest to you tried to take your life, your legacy, your honor, would you bow your head and accept it? Or would you stand, even with trembling hands and aching bones, and fight back with the truth? That choice, my friend, defines everything.